Namaskar friends, today's topic is our environment, which is chapter number 15 of the science textbook for class 10. As the chapter suggests, we will discuss a few pertinent issues and concepts of the environment in this session today. So, let us begin by asking the question, what is environment? We often say that the study of environment is perhaps the first convergence point between science and social sciences. It includes physical, social, cultural and human environment around us. If we consider everything around us as a part of the grand universe, then after deducting the individual, whatever remains is the environment for that individual. That is, universe minus individual is equal to environment. However, the individuals and environment do not function in isolation. Individuals interact among themselves constantly and they interact with different components of the environment, while different components of the environment interact among themselves. All these have resulted into individuals fashioning the environment, while environment impacting individuals. All along the history of human civilization and the planet Earth, we see these interactions happening between individuals and environment. These interactions make the study of environment interesting. So, in this chapter, we shall be studying how various components in the environment interact with each other and how human beings impact the environment. Having said so, let us try to understand the concept of ecosystem, which is perhaps the most important unit to understand in the study of ecology or environment. Any unit that includes all the organisms in a given area interacting with the physical environment, so that a flow of energy leads to a clearly defined biotic structures and cycling of materials between living and non-living components is an ecological system or ecosystem. It is more than a geographical unit, it is a functional system unit. It is the most basic unit for the study of environment. The term ecosystem was first proposed in 1935 by the British scientist Sir Arthur G. Tansley. So, let us understand the concept of ecosystem in a more detailed way. So, for the sake of explanation, let us consider the structures and functions of ecosystem one by one. However, it must be kept in mind that both are closely interlinked. Structurally, it has two components. The first is biotic. Under biotic, we have examples like plants, animals, human beings, microorganisms. The second components can be abiotic. The examples are sunlight, soil, air, minerals, nutrients, organic matter, water, etc. Functionally, ecosystem has two broad functions. The first is flow of energy. Energy flow is one way. Some of the solar energy is transformed and used by the biotic components for their energy needs, while most of the solar energy is wasted as heat energy and goes out of the system as sink. Energy can be stored, but it cannot be reused. The second function is nutrient cycling. In contrast, nutrients necessary for life such as carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus and water can be used over and over again, and hence it cycles through different components of the ecosystem. So, for any part of the environment to be considered ecosystem, it must have interactions among and between biotic and abiotic components, leading to the unidirectional flow of energy and cycling of nutrients through different components. For example, a pond and an old field and a watershed are examples of ecosystem. Now, depending upon the objectives, size of an ecosystem can vary from a small pond to the entire planet. Now, let us now find different types of ecosystems. Broadly, ecosystems are of two types. We can say as natural and artificial. while ponds, grasslands, forests are examples of natural ecosystem, aquarium and agricultural fields are examples of artificial ecosystem. Artificial ecosystems are created by human beings. Ecosystems can also be categorized as terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. Terrestrial ecosystems are land-based ecosystems such as grasslands, forests, etc., while water-based ecosystems such as ponds, sea, etc., are examples of aquatic ecosystems. Terrestrial ecosystems can further be categorized as forest ecosystems, grassland ecosystems, tundra ecosystems, desert ecosystems. They are so termed depending upon the dominant vegetations or typical climatic conditions. Aquatic ecosystems can also be further divided into two types, namely freshwater ecosystem and marine ecosystem. It then brings us to another important dimension of ecosystem, and that is the trophic structure of the ecosystem. Trophic means nourishment. So, from the standpoint of how different biotic components draw their respective nourishments, an ecosystem can be considered to be two-layered primarily. Number one, autotrophic or self-nourishing, that is the green belt of chlorophyll containing plants who make their own food using sunlight as the source of energy. In the process, inorganic compounds are converted into the organic compounds, which become the source of energy for the heterotrophs, which means other nourishing. So, in this layer, complex matters get decomposed primarily, that is in the layer of heterotrophs. So, in ecosystems, if organisms have similar ways of obtaining the nourishment, then they belong to the same trophic level. Thus, green plants occupy the first level and they are known as producers. Then the plant eaters occupy the second level, they are known as primary consumers or herbivores, while those who consume the primary consumers are known as secondary consumers or carnivores. There could be a fourth level of tertiary consumers or secondary carnivores who consume secondary consumers. It should be noted here that trophic classifications relate to the functions of the ecosystem and not to the species themselves, as any given population of a species may occupy more than one trophic levels depending upon how they obtain their energy. It brings to the other important concepts related to the ecosystem, and they are food chains and food webs. They relate to the trophic structures of ecosystem. The transfer of food energy from green plants through a series of organisms that consume and get consumed is known as food chain. As the food energy is transferred, a substantial portion, maybe 80 to 90% of the potential energy is lost as heat. Therefore, the food chains are shorter to keep energy available to the last organisms in the chain. The interlocking pattern of food chains is known as food web. So, in an ecosystem, there are several food chains, and these food chains interlinked at different places, and then they form food web. Human beings can function both at primary consumers level, that is eating plant products, or at secondary consumers level, that is meat eating, depending upon their food habits. Animals that can consume both plants and animals are termed as omnivores. So, friends, we studied about an ecosystem, their types, structures and functions. We also got to know about trophic structures, food chains and food webs. So, now let us try to observe an ecosystem which may be natural or artificial and write down about them. Go to a nearby pond or an agricultural field which is an example of artificial ecosystem, or an aquarium, which is again an example of artificial ecosystem, and observe for days together and write down different structures and functions of these ecosystem and share it in your class or write it in school magazine, wall magazines or in your blogs, etc. Now, this brings us to the other aspect of this chapter, which is how our activities impact the environment. There are three important issues discussed in this chapter. They are number 1 biomagnification, number 2 ozone layer depletion and number 3 waste generation and management. So, what is biomagnification? Human beings have often used pesticides or other such compounds or chemicals to increase the productivity. Some of these chemicals, due to their persistence in nature, become part of the food chains and then their concentrations increases at each trophic level. Biomagnification refers to the condition where the chemical concentration in an organism exceeds the concentration of its food when the major exposure route occurs from the organism's diet. Human beings, invariably at the top of any food chain, are the worst sufferers of biomagnification, especially if these chemicals happen to be toxic. Fishes and birds are especially vulnerable, as even slight increase in the concentration of these chemicals tend to affect them harshly given their body weight. The other issue is of ozone layer depletion. Ozone or O3 or trioxygen is a highly reactive gas composed of 3 oxygen atoms. It is both a natural and a man-made product that occurs in the Earth's upper atmosphere, which is called stratosphere, and lower atmosphere, which is also known as troposphere. Depending on where it is in the atmosphere, ozone affects life on Earth in either good or bad ways. In the lower atmosphere, ozone is a pollution, while in upper atmosphere it plays an extremely important beneficial role by preventing ultraviolet rays of the solar radiation from reaching the Earth's surface. UV rays are harmful for the life on the Earth. Stratospheric ozone is constantly produced by the action of the sun's ultraviolet radiation on oxygen molecules, also known as photochemical reactions. Large-scale air circulation patterns in the lower stratosphere move ozone toward the poles where its concentration builds up. In 1980s, scientists discovered that there had been a substantial depletion of ozone layer in the stratosphere over Antarctica, creating an ozone hole-like situation. They also discovered that the chloride radicals from compounds like chlorofluorocarbons or CFCs, which were used in refrigerants and sprays, were the main culprits for this depletion in the ozone layer. Soon, CFCs were banned. As per the Montreal Protocol, CFCs were banned for use in the refrigerators and sprays. The third environmental issue discussed in this chapter is of waste management. Whatever human beings do, they produce waste. The amount and nature of waste may vary. So, the first thing that can be done is to reduce the generation of waste. The second most important thing is to manage the waste, that is to dispose of this waste in a manner which does not harm anyone. And the third important thing is the nature of waste. There are some waste which are acted upon by other organisms and thus can be broken down into simpler components. Substances that are broken down by biological processes are said to be biodegradable. Substances that are not broken down in this manner are said to be non-biodegradable. These substances may be inert and simply persist in the environment for a very long time or may harm the various members of the ecosystem. So, shifting to activities that produce biodegradable waste than non-biodegradable waste is crucial in managing waste. Therefore, there are specific ways of handling and managing waste coming from domestic households, municipal, hospitals, industrial units, etc. In the end, I would urge our students to do some activities at home and school by speaking to their teachers and in collaboration with their peers. Use newspaper, magazine archives, internet to write more about the instances of biomagnification in the recent past, or do a literature survey to know more about the latest status of the ozone layer depletion, or suggest ways to reduce waste in your home or school. Thank you very much.